How important is it, Jordan, for you to stand for something?
Very important. Unless, I guess that's circumstantial depending on what you're standing for. But whatever you stand for, I believe you can't just, you have to be all in or all out. So if you're going to stand for something, then you commit to it. You can't back out at the last minute. You just have to do it. And I think it plays a huge role on your reputation, because if you say one thing and do the other, it's just, no one's gonna take your word for anything you say in the future. Say you're like, hey, I'm gonna do this. They're not gonna believe it until they see it, based off previous experiences of you committing to something and then just not executing it. So I think it really hurts your reputation if you don't.
So what you said is that if you stand for something, now you're going to represent it. So when you stand out there and say, "This is how I believe," and whatever it may be, it could be the score of a game, it could be your faith, it could be anything that you stand for something. But if someone approaches you, talks to you about that, and you back down from that, that affects your representation. Well, I'm sure that there's some listeners and people that are watching this that have maybe been through that. Oh, I believe that. And then when someone approached them, they cowered away or they walked away from that. Can that I think you even told us this, so I'm going to either repeat it or you can repeat this. You said that that can be cleaned up but it's going to take example. Is that correct? If you backed away from a representation, people are not going to believe you. But then as they watch you, you can clean that back up.
Absolutely, but it really takes, it's a real setback, because it's harder to regain that over time, because it's not one thing can't define it, but it's just over time you just have to build that back, and it's difficult because it's consistency, and it's every little thing that you do, you have to be legitimate with it, and you can't back out from it, whether it's like, hey, can you help me out with this? Yeah, sure. And then you don't do it. Maybe there is a legitimate reason and you explain that, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about. We're talking about what, like, if you're actually doing your word. When you say yes to something or no to something, you're giving your word for that. And you not doing it is breaking your word. I heard this from one of my dad's friends who is very wise, and he said, people can take everything from you except one thing, and that's your word. You have to give them your word. And that's and when you put it in that perspective, it really makes a deep concept to giving your word to someone. And I think that if you do give your word to someone, you can't back out from it, unless there's different circumstances, of course. But for the most part, once you give them your word, that's that, and you just have to do it or not do it, frankly.
Jordan, you're profound. The whole thought process I had as you started into that was the idea of wisdom, and you brought it up. A very wise man said, your word is your worth, and when you break your word, people start to back away from you. They second guess what's possible because you did not stand for what you said you stood for. So based on that thought process, that wisdom is experience, wisdom is learning, being through circumstances and knowing how they work. When you stand for something, when it becomes your representation, are you open to other people's opinions?
Well, you always have to hear everyone's opinion on it, but that doesn't mean you have to necessarily listen to what they're telling you to do. So it's easy to try to do something, think it's 100%, there's no flaws in it whatsoever, but if there's people who point out something, not in necessarily a rude or harsh way, just say, listen, you're kind of iffy on this part, then yes, you can listen to them. But if there's people that are just trying to discourage you, tell you can't do it, just be kind of a jerk to you about it, that's where you just have to say there's no value in listening to their what they have to say about it. But if there's people that come to you and say, hey, listen, you're kind of lacking in this area and this area, but if you get that all squared away, you'll be good to go. And that's where you should listen to them and get their input. But I believe that is strictly a matter of who people are. If they're like close people with you that have the same morals and beliefs and stuff, and they say, I think you're doing this wrong, and then they just come to you in a respectful way, then that's perfect. That's what you want. You want people to tell you your mistakes so you can improve on them. But there's a way to do it and a way to respond to them that very few people actually do. It's usually kind of in a rude way, or people get stubborn that can be a problem, because you get too stubborn with what you do. You still have to be open to what other people, their opinions, and determine whether it's legitimate or relevant or not.
Wow, there is so much. You just told us both sides. Because what happens in our life is, if you stand for something and someone comes in to question you, that means that they're standing for something else on the other side. And if you're close to them, they are going to be close to you. That doesn't mean that, no. If it's as you said, some people are just want to discourage you. Some people have been through some rough times in their life, and they're just going to spew on you. They're going to just take their life out on you. And that's not good. That's some of those things that wisdom says you run fast and far. I don't mean turn around and run, but to some things that's true to that. And as Jordan was saying, if sometimes you have to be open to their thoughts so that you can gain wisdom, but also our prayer is that they're open to you so you can create that conversation. When you stand bold for something, people see it. People want to be, that's very attractive for other people, because there's not a lot of people that stand out of the crowd because they believe a certain way.